difficulties. We are joined here with John from Focusrite. John, thank you so much for joining us here on this special edition of Gear Speak with Elixir Strings.
Thanks
so
for
for
having
those
me.
of
Happy
you who
to be
don't
here.
know, my name is Ben. I am actually the editor-in-chief of Performer magazine, but every now and again, Elixir lets me take over their channel and host really cool live stream events with artists and musicians and guitar players and folks within the industry who we can talk to and perhaps get some knowledge out into the world. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to be talking all about recording and specifically guitar recording. So John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
So
just happy to be on the stream.
I have kind of a bullet point list of things I want to talk about. The first thing we should do is probably define what an audio interface is for those who are looking to get into the world of home recording. It's more than just an analog to digital converter. So maybe in like a 30-second elevator pitch, since you are the expert and Focusrite makes great interfaces, you can kind of give us a rundown of what exactly an audio interface does for the home recording artist.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you point out, an audio interface is at its most basic is a way to get audio signals in and out of your computer. So it's a box that will convert your XLR microphone connection or instrument connection into a USB connection. But as you mentioned, there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot of circuitry and components that are needed to make that happen. So inside of the interface, not only is there an analog to digital conversion happening, where you can convert those analog signals into signals your computer can understand, but there's also analog circuitry, things like a preamp in order to bring that mic level up to the proper level and all of that. So it's basically a mic preamp and an analog to digital and digital to analog converter in a box. And that's going to allow you to plug in your microphones and your instruments, get that into the computer,
Awesome.
and then get audio
so
back out.
Again, this stream hopefully will be geared towards people who are looking to maybe get into recording for the first time. Like I had mentioned earlier, maybe seasoned vets who've done the touring thing and are looking to kind of dip their toes in the water for the home recording world. Maybe they've recorded only in commercial studios before. Let's talk guitars specifically. I've done a lot of recording. I'm sure you have as well. Obviously, the first thing I always do as a guitarist, and let me know if you agree or disagree, is I always string up with a fresh set of strings. Since we are on the Elixir channel, these are my strings of choice. These are the 13 gauge acoustics that I like. I see John has some as well there in the background. All right, we've got his acoustic strings of choice, and I think I spy some OptiWeb electric strings.
Awesome. Yes, I have these from
so
my
I've been using Elixir for a long time. I like them in the studio because if I'm doing like a full weekend session, I can just string up, play for hours. They're not going to get corroded and gross and grubby like normal uncoated strings are. But beyond that, I also make sure it's important that my guitars are fully intonated perfectly before any recording starts. John, do you have any rituals that you do before you even plug into the interface when it comes to guitars?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. If you can get a setup and intonation, that's a really great idea. Certainly new strings, although make sure you get those on there maybe the morning of or the night before, so you get them broken in a little bit, of course. But yeah, just anything that you can make your guitar sound great at the source. I think we all get so excited about gear sometimes, and we're the most expensive microphone and what have you. But if your guitar doesn't sound good at the guitar, well, then you're not going to get a good recording. So anything you can do to help that out, intonation.
Now, I know you've got an interface set up behind you there. One of the questions we fielded on social media is, when it comes to recording guitars, and you've probably got some opinions on this, do you prefer or do you have thoughts on whether to record a guitar mic'd up, like mic'd up the cabinet, or going direct into the interface? So there are pros and cons to each. What are your thoughts there when it comes to just recording the actual signal of the guitar for the first time?
Well, you mentioned cabinet,
sure.
So we're going to talk electric guitar for a minute. Yeah, so of course, with an electric guitar, plugging directly into the interface has a number of advantages. Of course, I'm in an apartment here, so you don't need to worry about blasting an amp and miking that up. That's probably the biggest advantage. And then lately, over the last, I say a few years, but over a long time now, the amp modeling software that is available has just become so much better. And so you can get a variety of sounds, whereas you might have to buy, you might want to get a Marshall cabinet a Marshall head for that specific sound, and a Fender head for another sound. And a lot of times you can get all those different sounds built into a single, amp simulator. So the sounds have gotten a lot better too, as far as plugging goes.
What do you have behind you? Is that the 2i2 or is that a different model?
I'm plugged into the 2i2, which is down here. And
what I like about the Focusrite range, and it's specifically this one, and I have a solo in my own office, is there's something that we can talk about when you were talking about going direct called high Z. Now, why is that important for guitarists, and what does that do, and how would that work on a box like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. The high Z input is basically going to trigger this 1/4 inch input here to expect the very low level signal that's going to be coming out of a guitar pickup. So it's emulating the circuitry that you would find on an actual guitar amp head. And so it's a little bit different of a circuit than you would use for plugging in like a line level signal from a keyboard or a mixer, even though you're using the same cable. So having that high Z switch, especially when you're plugging in like an electric guitar or bass, those are going to be the two main applications for that. And then with acoustics, things get a little bit different because sometimes you have active pickups where you may or may not need it. But certainly if you're plugging in like your standard Stratocaster or, a bass guitar, something like that, the high Z.
So one of the nice things about the Scarlett range and, the Claret range and all the stuff that you guys make is you can go direct pretty simply. I mean, if you have a guitar, you just plug your jack into the 1/4 inch, and usually, at least on my unit, you literally just hit a button that says high Z, and it's going to know to transform that guitar signal up to the proper level so you can record with, right?
Yeah. In the case of the Scarlett, we have it labeled as instrument, but it's basically the exact same thing. And yeah, you just engage that button there. You can probably see if I do it here as well. This lights up red, and that engages the high Z mode. And you'll hear if you have a guitar plugged in without that on, you'll hear the guitar will be a little bit, it'll lose a lot of top end, be a little bit dull. And when you engage that, you'll get that.
We have a question from someone here. So if they are miking up a cabinet, and again, there are no off-limits questions here. When you're miking up a cabinet, you're going to go into presumably the mic preamp, right? Can you walk us through maybe that process for someone who's just starting out? Let's say they've got an amp, a live amp, and a guitar and a microphone. What are the steps that they're going to do to get their interface up and running quickly so that they can start recording a track almost right away?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's really pretty simple. So you just want to have of course you have to have your mic, put up against the amp. But once you have that set up, you're just going to take your mic cable, one end into the microphone. You can see I have kind of a similar setup right here. And then the other end, I have this turned down, so I should be able to do this. Oh, sorry about that. I guess I was wrong. Yeah, you just plug right into the interface. And you can notice here that these jacks actually accept both mic cables and 1/4 inch cables. So you'll see that a lot on a lot of interfaces. So yeah, you can use.
And one of the nice things that I like about my Focusrite interface is there's kind of a color-coded ring around the main knob there. For guitar players who like to turn things up loud, what is that? And maybe we can segue a little bit into gain staging if we want to get there. But when you're recording, what do those colored indicators mean, and what should you look out for as a guitarist?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are basically just level meters. So they're indicating how hot the level is that's coming into the interface. And so I have a microphone plugged in right now, but I'm not speaking into it. But as I turn this up, probably towards the high, you can hear me doubling up a little bit there. Let's see how I have a little level coming in. And I'll show you again when the guitar is plugged in, so it'll sound a little bit better. But basically, when you're green, your signal level is good. Anything below green is going to be too low. And if you record too low, the amp simulator you're using won't sound right. And also, when you boost it up later in your computer, you'll have a lot of noise along with it. So you want to hit that sweet spot of, you don't want it to be too low, but you also don't want it to go red, because once you hit the clipping point, you'll hear distortion there as well. And so what you want to do is have it be green, maybe a little bit of yellow here.
And that's a good point. In the old days of analog recording, if you're getting into that red zone, you were actually saturating the tape pretty nicely, and that was a desirable thing in a lot of cases. In the world of digital, you hit clipping, and that is less desirable, I would say.
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest learning curve if you're coming from analog, is that you're not going to get any of that sweet harmonic distortion going over the zero. You want to treat that like a brick wall. And speaking of that, because of how clean digital recording is now, you don't need to worry about, peaking at -1 dB or -2 dB. A lot of people will recommend you be peaking as low as -18 or -12. And that will give you that headroom that you need. So if you do belt out a loud note or a hard chord at the end there.
And like you said, recording too hot is definitely going to present problems later if you're trying to add effects later on or plugins after the fact, especially if you're recording direct. Anytime you have to raise that signal up to an appropriate level, you're going to start introducing noise, and it's not going to be what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just about getting in that sweet spot where it's not too quiet, but it's not too loud that you're clipping that brick wall and getting that digital distortion that nobody likes.
That does bring us to the question of effects. I have my own thoughts on how to record guitars with effects, kind of pre into the DAW or post DAW. For someone maybe starting out, what are the various ways they can do it, either with stomp boxes beforehand or kind of if they've recorded a dry signal, what can you do from there as a guitarist once you've got it into the interface and into the DAW?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I personally like to record as clean as possible and gives you a lot more flexibility later on. So you mentioned effects. Pretty much every DAW now and any amp simulator software is going to have all the effects, a lot of the effects you're going to need built into it. And so by recording it clean, it gives you all that flexibility downstream. And then you might have effects available in your software that you don't have in a stomp box. The flip side of that is you might have a really great sounding pedal, right? And you want to get the sound of that pedal. So you could record that pedal straight, through the microphone. But then you're stuck with that sound. So what a lot of people like to try to do is kind of get the best of both worlds. So you can do that by splitting your guitar signal ahead of time. And I'm getting a little bit down the rabbit hole here, but I guess what I'm saying is if you record it clean, you do have ways to go back after the fact, with reamping and techniques like that, where you can go ahead and still get that sound into a pedal. Whereas if you record with your effects,
now you mentioned something I actually had on my notes here, which is signal splitting and reamping. And what you touched upon were some of the kind of best of both world scenarios where you can split that signal. And if you want to record out through your effects boxes because you like the sound of that, great. And then you can also go in direct, so you can have an unaffected dry signal that you can process the heck out of later and do whatever you want with. One of the questions we're getting here is, are there any disadvantages to recording direct? Is there anything you can think of? Because that's a tough one for me. Are there any disadvantages?
Or even from a technical standpoint, probably not. I think that's where you get into it. It depends. It really depends, right? If there's a certain sound that you're able to get out of your amp and it's inspiring to you, and it's kind of that non-tangible thing that you can't really put your finger on, I guess there's something to that. But from a technical standpoint, recording it dry, because like I said, with the reamping, kind of always go back. But there is something to the way that the player is interacting with the amplifier, and that's something that I'd say it's more of a feel and artistic thing, maybe more than a technical one. But I'm sure that there's a lot of opinions.
John, you've obviously been dealing with interfaces for a long time, and with guitar players who are recording, at all levels. And this might be a broad question, but are there any common mistakes or pitfalls or things that you can think of that people getting into recording, especially guitarists, should maybe look to avoid? And anything you can think of that are kind of on the don'ts list when it comes to the world of recording. We've talked about clipping, and that's probably one of the more common ones. Is there anything else that you can think of for people joining the stream that they can kind of jot down, hey, maybe I should avoid this or not do this, or this is probably not a great idea for my session?
Well, clipping is certainly probably one of the biggest things. The other thing that can get a little bit tricky when you're recording for the first time is monitoring in general, how you're listening to what you're playing. That throws people off all the time, because you have two different options. Most interfaces have a button called, direct monitoring, and that basically allows you to listen directly off of the input before it hits your computer. That's great if you're doing vocals or something like that. It gives you that almost zero latency between your headphones and your, and yourself. And but that's going to be a clean signal. So what happens to people a lot of times is that they don't realize that that's on, and they're monitoring that, and then they're also monitoring through the DAW. And so you're getting like the clean guitar on top of the amp guitar, a lot of phasing, latency thing happening. So I'd say check your monitoring setup. That's a big one.
When I got my first interface, and we're talking many years ago, that was definitely something that tripped me up, is hearing myself and then hearing myself and then hearing myself. And I'm like, wait, what is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like this effect that was happening. Yeah, it's like that. And yeah, so we want to make sure you're just monitoring.
What we're talking about is listening back to what's being recorded, either as it's happening, like you had mentioned, or after the fact. Let's say we've put a bunch of tracks down. Now we want to listen to our mix. We sit back. On an interface, what are our monitoring options? Because I know that that's something that people get questions on a lot, is, well, how am I going to listen to this back? What do I need? What's on the back of the interface there? Unravel that mystery for us.
Yeah, sure. So of course, you always have headphones like I'm using right now, and you have a headphone output on the front of the interfaces here, and then on the back of you have outputs for studio monitors or speakers as well. So speakers, monitors are kind of interchangeable here, and these are just 1/4-inch outputs that can be connected, to each speaker. And so yeah, you can basically, and so that's another thing to manage as well. So say you're recording, especially an acoustic guitar, and you certainly don't want to monitor that through speakers, because then you're going to get a feedback loop and all that, and that happening as well. So yeah, I mean, I think so you have the interface gives you that flexibility of having, for example, on the 2i2, I have a separate monitor control and I have a separate headphone knob, so that when I am recording with a mic, I can go ahead and turn down the speakers, but I can still hear in my headphones. But yeah, using headphones, especially when you're recording with a live microphone, is super important, so that you don't have the audio.
Yeah, because one of the worst things that can happen is bleed onto a track where you're hearing things getting recorded that really shouldn't be recorded in the room. And when we're talking about monitor speakers, we're talking about something that's different than, say, hi-fi speakers in a stereo setup. These would traditionally be powered monitors with balanced inputs, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So as opposed to hi-fi speakers, studio monitors tend to have a more flat frequency response. So that way, hopefully your mixes translate a little bit better, when you're taking into different sources. So yeah, studio monitors provide you with that flat frequency response and that professional balanced connection. So
we are getting a question here, and thank you for everybody who's putting questions in the comment section. I mentioned at the start of the conversation, what we want to do is save some time at the end, and we'll do a little Q&A. I've been kind of monitoring the best ones here, so thank you to everybody. But we do have one that is important, because this might have been something I should have touched upon at the beginning, is, John, when you are, let's look at this interface. Could you hold that up, just the front panel, so we can take a look at it?
Yeah, I'm going to use
So we have on the front panel, it looks like 2 different inputs, correct?
In fact, yeah, it's a little bit confusing, because the interface I'm using looks more like the one on the bottom.
So on the front panel, typically you'll find a couple of input options, either 1/4-inch or XLR, or even combo jacks, like John had mentioned earlier. And one of the questions that's come up a few times, which is why I want to address it now, is, okay, I'm recording things. Can I, and here are the questions, record things simultaneously, or do I have to record one at a time? That's a great question for singer-songwriters who are maybe doing vocals and guitars at once. And then how do I get those onto separate tracks? So let's talk, number 1, simultaneous recording on inputs, and number 2, routing within the DAW and what that entails.
Yeah, absolutely. So using my handy Scarlett Solo that I had here before, this is actually something that a lot of people don't realize at first, that we call this the Scarlett Solo, but it is a 2-input interface. So even on this interface, you can record the mic input and the instrument input to a separate track. So it's actually a 2-input interface, similar to the 2i2. And as you go up the range in the Scarletts and many other interfaces as well, you can have 4 microphones at the same time, or even 8 microphones if you're doing a drum. So yeah, you can definitely.
And then the follow-up question to that was, okay, I've got the interface. I've got maybe 4, 8 inputs in my DAW. What do I do here? You know, how do I manage all of that?
Yeah. I'm going to see if it'll let me,
Where's
it's not letting me
Zoom?
zoom in
Look
here.
at that.
Oh, wait, there it goes.
Well, I
I
can
don't
see
know if
some
I'll be able
different
to get it
colors.
live, but
I
here
can
we
see
go.
some different colors in the DAW there.
Yeah, exactly. So I have this first track, and you're probably not going to be able to see the detail part, but basically you can create as many tracks as you want. I have 2 going on here right now. And then when you create a track in any DAW setup, it's going to have a spot where you can choose which input you're using. So for my microphone here, it's a super small in Ableton, but it's popping up right here, 1 or 2. So basically what you do is you set one track for channel 1, you set the other track for channel 2, and you're good to go.
Most
it worked.
most DAWs that I've used, and I've tried, I think all of them at this point, they're all fairly similar in how you route the inputs to a track on the screen. Do you have any preferences as a guitarist on what DAW to use, or are most of them pretty easy for a guitar player to pick up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would have to say, well, if you're on Mac, I would certainly open up GarageBand and play with that, because it's there already, and it gets better and better. It's kind of crazy how good it is. So that's a fun one. I kind of go that way. Our Scarlett interfaces include Ableton Live Lite. Typically used a little bit more for electronic music production, but I use it for guitar stuff just fine. So I mean, any DAW, I'd say, a lot of the DAWs now are all very similarly, you know, powerful and sound great and have a lot of effects. So I think it comes down to finding the one with the workflow that, you know, I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. Ableton, if you're a guitar player who also needs to lay down maybe some electronic parts, maybe synth parts or drum machine loops, that's a really, really popular one, like you said, in the electronic world. GarageBand is ridiculously fully featured these days, and I'm not even, I mean, there's no way to look down on anybody using GarageBand, because it's a fully functional DAW with tons of great built-in effects and virtual instruments and plugins. There's no reason to be ashamed of making an entire album in GarageBand if it comes free with your Mac. It's fully packed. I've taken a look at the newer versions, and I'm pretty impressed with what they're throwing in for free.
I know. I would have loved to.
Yeah, as opposed to
day, right?
again, I'm dating myself, but starting out with a big 2-inch, 24-track tape machine and trying to align tracks in the analog world. So, John, yeah, exactly. We do have about 5 minutes left, and I would love to do some Q&A from the folks who've been attending here. Thank you again to everybody who's joined us. I will say, if you miss any portion of our chat here, we will be archiving this here on the Elixir Strings channel and also on the Performer Magazine YouTube channel. So if you missed anything, or if you think this might be helpful for someone else in your band or a friend or family member, we will be saving this so you can go back to it later. But let's get on to maybe 1 or 2 questions. Now, this relates back to something that you had talked about earlier with reamping and dry signals. Someone's asking, how do I get a signal out of my interface and then process it externally? Can you maybe talk about reamping a little bit? It's a little bit more of an advanced topic, but why not?
Yeah, essentially what you would do is route. So you just saw how we were routing the inputs into the DAW, right? So essentially what you would do is route to the outputs. So, different interfaces, like smaller interfaces like the 2i2 will generally just have one pair of outputs for your speakers. Although you could use those for this purpose if you didn't have speakers. But say something like the 4i4, this has the additional set of outputs on it, as you can see here. And so what you would basically do in your DAW is you would set the output to that other output, and it would send out of there. And then now, from a technical standpoint, that is a line level input. So you wouldn't necessarily put that directly in your amp. That's where you get into some of the more advanced, you would want a box in between there. But basically, that's what you would do, is you would route through an output on your interface.
So, and then you would come just back like John showed us in his DAW, just by pulling down the menu and selecting, okay, input 1 on my interface is going to go to track 1 in my DAW. You kind of do the reverse. You output a signal back out of your interface, using that 1/4-inch cable. There are reamping boxes that you can buy. I think Radio makes a good one. There are some others on the market too, and send that signal out. So it's a reverse process. And then, like John said, you would take that signal back into your interface, and then do what you will with it. So that is a more advanced topic, but it's not as difficult, I think, as some people might make it out to be. And it's not that intimidating. You can do it. Now, here's an interesting question, and I'm not sure the application for this. Can I record both inputs? And I'm assuming they're talking about the solo there. Can I record both inputs, my guitar and voice, on one track at the same time? Not sure about that or why you would want to do that.
Unless you're talking about it in context of stereo, then of course you could, most DAWs allow you to create a stereo track where you can go, inputs 1 and 2 would be together, 3 and 4 would be together. Just keep in mind when you do that you're going to have input 1 on the left and input 2 on the right. So on a Scarlett solo with a singer and a guitar, that might not be ideal.
I'm trying to think of why you would want to do that. I get the stereo application. I have a synthesizer that has stereo outputs because some of the effects are in stereo, and it's nice and lush to hear it kind of bounce between speakers. For a singer-songwriter, for someone who's playing guitar and singing, I don't think that would work for the reasons you said. You'd have a hard panned left and a hard panned right on the same track.
And I think, this kind of brings up, you're talking about pitfalls, but this is a big one too.
Yes.
The whole mono stereo thing, people get thrown off when they're, well, why am I going to record in mono? I want to hear it in both speakers. But that mono, when you record in mono, it just means that the same signals go into both speakers essentially. And so that whole
And keep in mind that guitar is basically, when you're recording it, it's a mono instrument. You might be playing more than one note, but that signal coming in is a mono signal. Right. 99% of the time. So there are special applications, sure. But yeah, so your voice is mono, the guitar is mono. So yeah, that is something to keep in mind. You're going to want to probably mix in stereo and place different instruments in certain places. Right. But recording, you're typically, most instruments will be a mono recorded track.
Right. Exactly.
So John, I think we've hit most of the questions. I'm sorry if anybody did ask a question here that we weren't able to get to. When we post this and archive it here on the Elixir Instagram channel and on YouTube, if you want to ask your question there, we will do our best to answer that. I know we get a lot of questions after the fact. And if there's anything that I can't answer, maybe I'll just pop you a quick email to do that. But we have a really big announcement. So for those of you who stuck around, you're going to get some good news. Elixir, along with some awesome sponsored partners, including our friends here at Focusrite and Music Nomad, are doing a really awesome giveaway. Starting, let me get the date right, this week on the 23rd, we are going to, and by we, I mean Elixir, Focusrite, and Music Nomad are going to be giving away 3 grand prize packages, which are going to include a Scarlett 2i2, which is awesome. Packages of Elixir strings in the gauges of your choice, and also packages of Music Nomad music accessories, which are awesome for keeping up maintenance on your guitars. I use them myself. Like I mentioned, I use a couple of Focusrite interfaces here in the office and for my own personal use. John, I want to thank Focusrite for being generous and donating those to the prize packages. For details on that, look in the descriptions here on Elixir's social channels. They'll have all the info that you need on how to enter and any requirements on how to win. I see all the people asking. That information will be here on the channel. So if you want an opportunity to score one of these really awesome Focusrite interfaces, along with a strings bundle and an accessories package from Music Nomad, all the details will be laid out here, so stick around on the Elixir channels. They'll give you everything you need. But John, that brings us to the end of our time. I can't thank you enough. I think we packed in, hopefully, a lot of useful info for people joining. Where can people find Focusrite? That's probably an easy question if they want to get more info.
Focusrite.com. Or, of course, here on Instagram.
Focusrite across the board, Instagram, Twitter, every usual suspect where you would find companies that you know and love online. John, thanks. There's so much to talk about. Maybe we can have you back again sometime for a round two and maybe do some more advanced stuff. But
Yeah.
Thanks again to Elixir for allowing me to host this. Thanks to John and Focusrite for joining us, for donating to the prize bundles, and for everybody who watched here. Again, this will be archived here on Instagram and on YouTube. So until next time, thanks everybody and have a great afternoon. And happy Champions League Tuesday to all who celebrate. Real Madrid and Liverpool kick off in about a half an hour. I think you can see who I'm rooting for. So a la Madrid, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.